Good morning, class. In the previous few classes in college, we learned about few organizational facilities such as building and lighting. Now we'll be moving on to the third one, which is ventilation. So, okay, what is ventilation according to you? Okay, you can't answer right now, but still, ventilation is where you allow air to flow in and out from a building or from a home. Now, all our homes have got ventilation, right? Even our classrooms do have ventilation. Yes. For example, take the case of our classroom. If the windows are not open any time during the day, if the door is always locked and all the 60 to 70 students are within the classroom, how long can you sit there? Yeah, you feel suffocated. Now, there are few people among ourselves who have fear of closed spaces. We call it claustrophobia. And we also have people who tend to be sleepy. Okay, you guys are sleepy or not, even if the window is open, never mind. But those people who find very tired or very much, anemic sort of thing. So when this happens, scientifically, it blocks the oxygen to your brain, right? So if you are always in a closed room and you have no other way of getting in fresh air, you feel very much claustrophobic. You would feel discomfort. You will feel suffocated. Suffocation is one term which we constantly use. In the same way, in a factory, when you have 200 to 250 employees, 200 to 250 employees working in a factory, and if everything is closed in, we are just talking about 60 students in a small room, right? Now, when you talk about 200 to 250 employees, and they are all working in closed space which has no contact of any fresh air, this causes severe suffocation and discomfort. Now, if your employees are not provided at a comfortable comfort, are not given enough comfort, or they are facing discomfort because of the lack of fresh air, they won't work well. Your profit, your sales, your revenue, everything gets affected in the long run. Okay. What is ventilation? Here it's given ventilation refers to supply or removal of air. Now I have certain words which are put in bold. So these are the points which has to be there in your answer. So let's go for the general meaning. Like I mentioned, ventilation is where you let air get inside the factory and go out from the factory. Okay. When you allow air to flow like freely. Now we won't place any restriction on ventilation. So ventilation allows you to make the air move in and around the factory in a free manner. Okay, we have two ways to do it. You can either adopt natural means or go for mechanical means. Natural means refer to your normal fresh air which you can freely let in by opening a window or two windows, whatever be the thing. But mechanical means is where an organization cannot get enough natural ventilation. They need to go for different duct or different, dent or ventilation machines which would mechanically or artificially create the air and get it inside the factory. Is it clear to you? Okay. Now, why see, as such, our subject is a management topic, but it has got a lot of aspects from different engineering principles. Okay, like your mechanical engineering, for instance. So ventilation, as per the application of engineering techniques, you can use it for two main things. First, to control air currents within the plant, which means to say, like how we have the general meaning which says air can flow in and out of the factory due to ventilation. Okay. In order to control this flow or this air current within the plant, we need ventilation. Is it clear to you? Second, maintain satisfactory air purity. Now this says if there are any contaminants in the air inside the factory, that level of contamination can be reduced or the pollutants can be reduced. Alright. What we mean to say is there are certain processes, okay, certain manufacturing processes which includes a lot of plant equipment and all of that. When they start up with the production, okay, they release certain gases or odors or some sort of what do I say, a sort of heat wave maybe. So when these are released, it results in a lot of temperature differences within the factory. Okay, not only does it lead to temperature difference, it also increases the number of pollutants. Now if you notice some factories such as your food industry or your pharmaceutical industry, if one pollutant falls on the product, the quality of the product is compromised, right? When your mom cook food in at home, like on the previous day, and if there's some leftover curry, for example, she would keep it inside the fridge or store it in a safe way, because she knows if she keeps it outside throughout the night and wait till next day, the food is going to spoil, right? Why does it happen? You can't always blame temperature on this. When you cook inside your home, there are a lot of other activities happening inside the home as well as outside. Okay, these activities sometimes result in a lot of pollutants. Okay, a lot of dust particles being present in the air. Now if these dust particles and these pollutants land upon the food gets spoiled. Yes, temperature also plays a role, so does pollutants. So in the same way, for those industries and for general industries wherein when they have the manufacturing process and a lot of pollutant is released in the air and the air is completely contaminated, in order to ensure that the air is free of contamination, you need ventilation. Now this is very much required in those industries such as food industries and pharmaceutical industries, because if one pollutant lands on the product, it's going to compromise on the quality. So I hope these points are clear. Let's move on to the next one. Now there are three main reasons as to why you need ventilation. First, protect the health of workers. Second, preserve product quality. Third, meet legal requirement. Now first, like I mentioned, there are certain machines, certain equipment which releases a lot of pollutants, a lot of heat, moisture, a lot of heat waves and all that. This might affect the health of the workers. Okay, even though machines do most of the work, maybe we have workers who are operating those, and when they are placed or when they are seated or if they are standing near to such machines which produce a lot of heat waves or different gases, if they inhale, it causes a lot of respiratory problems. Okay, even though we cannot stop the heat wave of those machines, if you can let air inside the plant, and if it minimizes all these heat waves and odors, it takes it, disperses it or scatters it somewhere else, the effect on the health of the worker is reduced. Is it clear to you? Yes? Okay. Please try to understand, when a lot of heat wave and other fumes or gases are being released because of the production process, and if employees or workers or operators are very much closer to it, it affects their health. It causes respiratory issues, right? So what do you normally do? You try to let in ventilation or let in the free movement of air inside the plant. When air freely moves inside the plant, it minimizes those levels of heat waves, those levels of fumes and everything. Okay, when this is reduced, they can take care about the health of the worker. So in order to protect the health of the workers from different fumes and different odors, it is very important to understand that air has to be flown, has to be let inside the factory on a timely basis, so that this ill effect on the health of the workers can be reduced. Second one, preserve food quality. Like I mentioned, pharmaceutical industry and food industry, if the pollutants present in the air lands on the product, this compromises on the quality. You might not land up with the right finished good. Okay, in the case of food processing and pharmaceutical. In order to avoid spoilage of those perishable products, you need to ensure that ventilation is there in the factory, because if ventilation is there, it reduces the contaminants in the air. Okay, it ensures air purity. This would help you in preserving the product quality. The third one is meet legal requirement. Factories Act 1948 has a provision in most of the facilities which we have studied. It had a provision in building, it had a provision in lighting, it has for the rest of them as well. So ventilation is given as a legal requirement which every factory or every organization must follow. They must provide some facility in order to ensure ventilation. Whether they go for natural means or artificial means, ventilation is a legal requirement as per Factories Act of 1948. I hope the slide is clear. Okay. Now there are two types of ventilation. Now this is actually based on the purpose of ventilation. So you have general ventilation and then we have local exhaust ventilation. What does general ventilation do? General ventilation works for two main principles. Okay. First, you need to provide comfort to your employees. Second, keep the contaminants which is present in the air to safe limit or to a prescribed limit. Okay. A permissible limit sort of thing. So general ventilation, let's talk about general ventilation. First one, it says general ventilation for comfort level. Is it clear to you? General ventilation for comfort level. Sorry, yeah. Here it means that from different people, when people work, when they're slogging, having manual labor, when machines are being used, when other equipment or processes are being used, some of these processes actually result in a lot of heat energy being pushed out into the air. Okay, for example, hold on. For those industries which have chemical processes or mechanical processes, when they do these manufacturing, it is quite evident that heat is being released. The heat which is released from workers who are working manually, the manual labor, or machines or any other form of equipment which produces a lot of heat energy throughout the process of production, we call it heat gains. Okay, what we mean to say is the air inside the factory tries to, it kind of becomes very hot in a gradual manner. Okay, so when processes happen, machines, plants, equipment, and people who are involved in this process, they release a lot of heat energy. As a result, the air inside the factory starts becoming very hot. Okay, we call this as heat gains. Okay, in order to control that high temperature inside the factory during these circumstances, it is very important to provide ventilation. If air is allowed to freely move inside the plant, when a lot of heat energy is produced inside the plant and you let air get inside the factory, it is going to offset or reduce the heat energy in the air. Okay, please get this concept right. If there's a lot of heat energy in the factory, you let air inside, the amount or the frequency as to when you send in good fresh air into the factory, this would help in reducing the heat which is produced in the factory. Okay, so as I mentioned, when a lot of heat is being liberated from different machines or people or whatever be the equipment placed inside the factory, when the heat is released during the normal course of production, if you let fresh air get inside the factory, it's going to offset these heat waves. We call it heat gains also. This would help in reducing it and keeping the temperature in a very good level inside the factory. Second one, to keep contaminants within safe limits or dilution. Now, there are certain processes which, no matter what you do, they release certain contaminants or pollutants in the air. Okay, so ventilation, even though you provide ventilation, you might not be able to take it out completely in terms of general ventilation. Okay, so rather what you can do is, ventilation would help you in even though there are contaminants in the air, it would help you in reducing the contaminants to certain permissible limit. Okay, for example, when you go, if you use a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler, or you must be knowing as part of common knowledge, wherein it undergoes a lot of emission tests. Now the basic aim of emission test is to see how much the vehicle is leaving out the exhaust gases when it's in motion, or when a car is being used, like if it's traveling from one point to another, what is the air or what is the exhaust, what are the gases, what is the level of gases which is being emitted outside, what are the limits, or what is the amount of pollutants which is released. Okay, we have emission tests happening because authorities ensure that this emission of different exhaust gases, see, from vehicles you have gases like carbon monoxide and many other, carbon dioxide and all those gases, in order to check whether these gases, even though you cannot stop from emitting those, whether these gases are being emitted as per the limit or as per the what do I say? Yeah, a limit sort of thing. Okay, so what authorities would do is they would say a vehicle can only emit only so and so of levels, such and such levels of gas. If it exceeds that, they would take steps to ensure to reduce the emission, but they would also set certain limits beyond which an organization cannot, a car cannot emit the gases. Okay, so here general ventilation is, in a way, I just gave you an example of the car. How far is it clear? Please let me know later. General ventilation is where, in order to keep contaminants, okay, within a safe limit, in order to keep contaminants within a safe limit, you can use ventilation. This happens when there is no choice but to release, but we need to understand that there would be few contaminants which will be obviously released. You cannot take them off, okay, but you can reduce them or keep them within certain threshold limit. We call them threshold limit valve. You see it on the screen. Okay, those are the limits which are set. Those are the permissible limits which are set in order to ensure that contamination or the different contaminants found in the air is within the same limit, within that specific limit. Second one is local exhaust ventilation. This says, see, in the previous one they said to keep contaminants within the safe limit, which means to reduce the contaminants. But in local exhaust, they are talking about complete removal of those contaminants. Okay, so what it does is, like how you have the exhaust fan in your kitchen, in your restrooms. Yes, what does it do? When you add tadka on your gas stove, when you cook something and you add tadka, which release in this huge burst of spices, and it is very much pungent and it's very maybe you start coughing too. Okay, these circumstances you see it at home, right? That is when you switch on the exhaust fan. What does the exhaust fan do? All these pollutants or the things which is making the worker or the employee uncomfortable, those contaminants are captured and thrown outside. This is called as local exhaust. So what was the difference between general ventilation and local exhaust? General ventilation is where, yes, they do provide ventilation for comfort level, but with reference to the second point where they say they reduce the contaminants to a particular level, yes, but in local exhaust ventilation they try to eliminate that contamination. They try to keep the air very much pure. So what does this normally under local exhaust ventilation you have different fans which is used. This captures the contaminants and throws it outside. This is what your type of ventilation. This type of ventilation has been divided on the basis of purpose. First one talks about creating a comfort level and reducing contaminants on a okay safe limit. Second one is local exhaust ventilation, which captures the contaminants, throws it outside. The difference being general ventilation talks about reducing contaminants. Local exhaust ventilation talks about elimination or destruction of all contaminants. Okay, the presentation broke in between. Never mind. Okay, so we discussed about types of ventilation. Now we'll move on to sources of ventilation. Okay, like I mentioned, you can do ventilation through two main methods. One is natural means and mechanical means. Okay, natural means is where you need to consider two natural forces which are very much there in Mother Nature. First is your wind force. The second one is your stack effect. Wind force is where you try to find the direction as to how the wind is flowing from north to south, from east to west, all that. Now you tell me, how do you find out from which direction is wind flowing, from which direction to which direction? Okay, how do you find out? How do you find out whether it is windy today, whether you will have a lot of air or wind flowing in through that area? How do you get to know? You try to access weather reports or weather forecast. Okay, so these weather reports and forecast is going to let you know from which direction to which direction is the wind flowing in. Okay, suppose you have wind flowing that in that particular area from north to south. So it is common knowledge to understand. It is very important to open the windows in the northern side of the factory building and in the southern side. You get the point? Yes. If you understand that, or if you know or you're familiarized with that this factory allows air in this area, especially air or wind flows from north to south, it is common knowledge that you keep the windows which are placed on the northern side and the southern side of the factory building open. So this would let air flow in. When you are aware of the condition that air flows from only north to south in that particular area, you should open the windows which are placed in the northern side and in the southern side. If both are opened, it is very easy to let air or wind pass through the factory. Is it clear to you? Wind force, I'll repeat, wind force data can be obtained from different forecast weather reports. You can access those on Google or otherwise. Get those reports and see how is the wind flowing or what is the direction of the wind in that particular area. Okay. For example, in that particular area, say Belandur, wind is flowing from north to south. Alright. If it is flowing in such a manner, you should keep the windows which is there in the northern side and the southern side open so that air can freely flow inside the building. Is it clear to you? So this is the first force which you consider, which is your wind force. Second one is your stack effect. Stack effect happens when you try to understand what is the difference of temperature inside the factory and outside the factory. Yes, what is the difference of the temperature inside the factory and outside of the factory? Okay, for example, production is happening in your factory. Okay, and since most of the processes involves the emission of heat energy, your factory is also producing a lot of heat energy, right? So when heat energy is produced, you find the temperature of the air temperature is going higher and higher in your organization. Okay, so what can you understand? And the thing is, when you face a lot of heat when you're working inside the organization, if you take a break and come outside the organization, you feel it is very cool. Yes, see, now you can understand what is the difference between the temperature inside the organization and outside the organization. Yes, if you apply science to this, if the temperature of air or the air density is higher in one area, it flows easily to the area where the temperature is less. If the temperature inside your factory is very high and you can open the windows, if you open a sufficient number of windows, even though the air density is very much warm inside the factory, it lets out air easily through those windows. Here they apply scientific principles to it, because science says if the air density is warmer in one particular area, if the temperature is very high, it can easily flow to areas which have less temperature. So if your factory is having high temperature because of the heat energy produced, temperature is rising, you open the window, the temperature goes from the factory to outside. Okay, that is your stack effect. When you try to control the flow of air by seeing the temperature differences inside the factory and outside the factory, we call it as stack effect. So wind force and stack effect is two important forces, natural forces, which you see if you want to provide natural ventilation by opening windows or any other sort of fixtures. Okay. Second is mechanical ventilation. When such natural air is not available near your factory, when there is not sufficient flow for all the 200 to 250 employees working in your factory, you have to adopt mechanical means. Alright, for this what you can do is you can create a lot of duct system which mechanically gives out air inside the factory. You can go for huge fans, like there are certain names, centrifugal fans, axial flow fans, roof extractors. Those would help you in taking care of ventilation, okay, through mechanical means. So for those organizations which do not have natural ventilation provision, they can go for mechanical thing. We see a lot of mechanical ventilation when you travel by road. Normally you see certain factories wherein if we are on a flyover, it's easier to see. You will find few bottle cap sort of thing turning on the roof of these factories. Earlier, I used to think such factories were Pepsi factories or any other beverage factory, but no, this is your mechanical ventilation. Because those things which are there on the roof, those roof extractors tries to provide mechanical ventilation inside the factory. For such factories which has those bottle cap sort of thing moving around, you must have seen it around, moving on the roof of the factory. Those are the means which is provided when natural ventilation is not available. Is it clear to you? Yes. So these are the two sources of ventilation. Now moving on to the next one, air